They made their way back an hour later. It was getting dark, and even though he could have easily slept through the cold night in the meadow, Avery thought it necessary for Dew to spend his night in the warm bed, and he agreed. Going through the corridor, they passed by many people who had just finished their work and were on their way to their quarters, but they didn't see a single person from the royal kitchen. Yet several knights came by. Some took a large circle around them, or probably only around Avery, while others purposely bumped into the other knight and gave him a deprecated look. "What's with them?" Dew asked the sixth time it happened, his gaze following the last culprit. "It's complicated," Avery answered again. Whatever it was that had happened in the last month, it must have been something big. Arriving upstairs, they saw a person walking up to the door of the room belonging to the two of them. "I'm here," Avery suddenly exclaimed, and immediately drew the person's attention towards them. She was a brown-haired woman, noticeably shorter than Dew, and looked to be over 30 years old, but younger than 50. She wore a blue piece of clothing, which was almost the same as the one Avery wore, so Dew managed to guess who she was. They came closer, and her eyes darted towards Dew as if to pierce him. Formally she began, "I see you are successful, how delightful." Avery, a little next to the track, responded, "Dew, this is Sue, my colleague, and Sue, you know him already." Sue energetically reached out for Dew's hand. Her grip was firm as she shook it. "Indeed, Avery can't stop talking about you every time we have to go out. And you should have seen her yesterday, full-on breakdown. I thought she would throw herself into her misericore." "Her?" he repeated. "Once was weird, but 4 times?" Sue looked at Avery, and her face changed from saying nothing about her internal feelings to a sort of surprised, if not shocked one. Meanwhile, Avery was as pale as Frederick's century-old washed-out apron. Nobody spoke a word for a long moment. "I thought you lived together," Sue then said very matter-of-factly, but didn't clear up whatever there was between the three of them. Dew didn't want to ask any question that sounded dumb or make any assumption that were wrong out loud. Who knew, maybe the female guard would execute him on the spot if he were to call her drunk or half-blind. Sue blinked a couple of times and shortly stared at Dew before her eyes went back to Avery. "I think you're missing out on sleep as well," the hybrid commented, his pink iris not leaving hers. "I could have sworn I thought you were semi-official," Sue forced words out of her mouth, and Avery's hand simultaneously grabbed her by the shoulder. "You really need to sleep, Sue. Maybe drink a glass of water to sober up. You're confusing me with someone else again now. Don't look away. Stop seeing ghosts, that's my job." Avery's tone was almost threatening, but close to shaky as well. She shook his hand off. "I'm sober, thank you. I'll leave you two to talk this one out then. He can't be this stupid." And she marched away with loud footsteps, and Dew believed to see a hint of sweat glistening on her forehead. Avery opened the door and let Dew in first, before going in and locking it behind himself. The room was similar to how Dew had left it, which wasn't in the least tidy enough for Avery's standards. His sweaty clothes had somehow disappeared. The bed was a mess, with the sheets tangled and filled with folds. Wordlessly, Dew pulled it to be a little flatter and sat down on the corner. Then he fixed his eyes on the ground. Avery was leaning onto the desk with his hands while looking at whatever there was on it. After a minute he said, "What a shame, the tulip is dead." And it was. Dew had noticed it as soon as he came in, and the dried petals were flying all over the place because the window had been slightly open. "What in the world happened while you were gone? What's with the nights? What's with Sue?" Dew exploded after another minute of uncomfortable nothingness. Avery let out a deep sigh. "Can we talk tomorrow? It's late and I need sleep." "No, we cannot," he immediately proclaimed, even though he felt sorry for his friend. The tired knight sighed again, put the scroll away, and sat down on the other end of the bed. "Please do let me rest." Dew considered it, seeing his friend sunken together next to him, with the wings laying almost flat on the bed. He caught a glimpse on Avery's bruised back, which was partially bandaged in a way which looked as if this was the cause for the dark spots. "I want to know what she meant. She said I can't be that stupid, so either you tell me now or I'll figure it out myself." Dew hated himself for putting pressure on the other like this. "Fine. There was this conflict between me and another man from another unit. I think he had only been in service for less than a year, because he didn't know how things worked," Avery began. His head was leaned on the wall while his gaze wandered outside where the nightfall could be observed. It was about half-time, and a couple of days later we just heard that some visitors didn't come, but that's not important right now. So Sue and I were sharing a room with 2 beds on the floor, with rooms that mostly had up to 3 two-story bunk beds, as far as I know. And everyone knew Sue was living there as the only woman in the army, but no one knew of me. The new guy, probably 40 years old already, I mentioned before, was quite rude from the beginning on to everyone except Sue, because he apparently had interest in her, but she didn't obviously not. As someone without proper knowledge of the army, he thought he had a chance with her, and asked her probably when she was going back to her room. Sue, of course, rejected him, because that's just what she does to pick-me assholes. So he gets angry, and he might not have had much experience in general, but he was pretty strong and punched her in the stomach before trying to force himself onto her inside said room. I was there and gave him a bit of a lesson, but I didn't break a bone or slice him open, just some bruises. I also informed him of the room that had been established when Sue and her little sister joined the army, which says that if a man succeeds into forcing himself onto a woman within the army, he will be beheaded. He scrambled but apparently saw things he wasn't supposed to. My bandages, to be precise. The next day, when I was in a group while we were going through the entrance of the mansion and I was on the stairs, he drew a sword behind me and slashed on my back. I wasn't hurt or anything, but he cut through the fabric between my wings. Then he pointed at me and, like an adult toddler, howled, "That's the woman, that's the woman, that's the woman," and other things about my skills, which he degraded under the argument of biology. My general didn't find that very funny, especially not when I told him what happened the night before, and decided that that man was no longer needed. Logically, to blow off some steam, I challenged him to a duel instead of letting him have the honor of a short decapitation. If he were to win, he would live. He didn't last long, and maybe I was a little too enraged and continued stabbing him after he was already dead. And maybe it went a little too far with slicing off his head, kicking it across the ground, picking it up again to showcase it, and threatening everyone who dares to touch Sue to have the same fate. And now they either fear or despise me, now that they believe me to be a woman, but Sue thought it was impressive. "And are you?" Du asked after he ended his story. "I don't know if I would describe that as being impressive instead of madness." Avery looked the other way. He knew what was asked of him. The other part Du pushed, growing more unsettled by the second. "Oh." He paused. He paused awfully long. Then he answered, "Well, it's easier not to be, and—" So he was, all the time, and Du didn't notice, and he didn't even tell him a thing. "Who knew of it before that event?" he then asked monotonously, not looking at Avery as well, so he couldn't see anything which might confirm it. "Not many. My general, Sue, a man called Rudolph, but he died in the last conflict, and— yeah." His voice shook towards the end. "Why didn't you tell me?" Du didn't want to sound hurt, but he did, and it was awful. "I had several small reasons. I didn't want you to tell anyone. Slip-ups happen even if you don't want to. And it's also because I didn't want to make things awkward between the two of us, but I didn't realize that you— I didn't think you'd actually feel attached. There are other reasons like security, but in how far it worked is questionable," Avery explained in a muted tone. Du took his blanket and laid down under it before turning towards the opposite wall. He didn't want to talk anymore, mostly because he didn't know what to say. He felt somewhat offended. What did Avery think of him? But he could also understand why he said it was safer, especially for a hybrid. Now what was next? What did this mean? Would he have to ask himself what else Avery had lied about? What would happen to his feelings? How was he supposed to look at the other now? All he hoped for was for Avery to lay down beside him and sleep through to the next day, and maybe then Du would have made up his mind about this new piece of information. He was ashamed of his reaction, and that he didn't notice earlier. Looking back, there were hints. He had never seen the other one undressed or talked about friends and romantic interests, and even the time shortly after they walked together with Josephine he had indirectly mentioned it. Avery had said he could debunk any claims. Dew would have never guessed this was the implication. That incident, this must have been when Avery noticed. He noticed what Dew truly felt, and now he regretted the joke even more. Maybe that's why he pitied his friend. Dew had fallen for someone who lied about their identity for years, and deep in his chest Dew knew this was his main reason he felt the hurt he did. He had thought to know someone, and it turned out that wasn't the case. He heard the door open and saw a shadow leaving. The door closed again, and a silent clicking noise could be heard as Avery locked the door. He was gone. Maybe he would sleep outside or not at all. He was someone to do that. Maybe Sue had another bed in her room from the time her corn snake hybrid sister was still alive and with her. She had been part of the army when she was still alive. Maybe that's how she died. On the battlefield. Maybe she fought, maybe she didn't. He wanted to know more about that girl, but didn't know if he could ask about it or not. He fell asleep. It was a good sleep for a while, soft and mostly warm. Then, in his dreams, he was laying in his bed as well. His eyes were open and he was younger. He didn't dare to move while he felt a slight trembling that was on his back, the edge of a wing. And he heard sobbing, but not that loud. It was being suffocated in a pillow. It made him want to cry as well, and he didn't know why. He didn't know why the little boy next to him was crying, and why there was a little blurry girl next to him, like a shadow, who was screaming through the trees. Dew wanted to turn around and hug him and hug her and say that everything was fine, but he didn't because he couldn't understand. So he cried on, and she kept screaming week by week, and Dew didn't do a thing until it stopped, having fully suffocated in a pillow, and there was just silence. He turned around in the dream and was met with a dark spot where someone was supposed to sleep. Her body was gone and his soul had dispersed. The next morning, when he knew he was awake, the left side of his bed was still empty. The dried petals were still laying and rotting on the same spot as last night. It used to be a pretty plant. Now there in the pot stood the shriveled-up trunk and the bare pistil of the flower. And still it was there, in the sun, for him alone to see. What a pity. Differently to what he expected from himself, he didn't make his way towards the kitchen. They probably didn't even know he had regained his freedom. Instead, he strode through the corridors of the castle he was allowed to be in. He wasn't sure what he was trying to achieve. Maybe he was hoping to see Avery patrolling somewhere, but he didn't, and so he couldn't apologize for accidentally giving him the cold shoulder. The other person he wanted to see, but not actually, was Sue, because he wanted to ask her about several things, but Dew was scared they might be too intimate questions. He didn't deserve to know the answers anyway. He ended up next to the entrance to the corridor where the portraits were hung up. At first he wasn't sure if he was allowed to go there, but then he told himself that it would just be a quick glance at the latest pictures, and if anyone would come, the curtains were big enough for him to hide behind. So there he stood, staring into the unreal eyes of Princess Alba, the person that once saved Charles and saved him as well, even though not fully. Maybe Frederick was right, and she really was the greatest accomplishment of the current king. If I were you, I would leave before anyone stricter than me comes and sees you. This is royal property. A voice came from Dew's right side, and he twirled around. Sue was standing broadly with her arms crossed before her chest. She was in full armor, but the helmet was missing. Dew stepped away and next to her. "I'm sorry," she shrugged. "Why do you think I'm here? I'm no better." "Did you see Avery last night?" He got straight to the point. She shook her head, surprised at the sudden question. "No, but we'll be patrolling the 3rd floor on the east side tomorrow morning." "Did she leave?" She hit the hammer on the head. Sue frowned. "I didn't think she'd keep that from you. Do you know why?" Avery said because it was easier as a man, but enough with this. The woman gave him a nod. In that very moment she wanted to walk off, but Dew held her back. "I do have a question, though. It's about your sister." She immediately stopped and made direct eye contact. "What's with her?" she almost hissed. "Avery mentioned her yesterday because she also used to be in the army. Ken, Am I allowed to know what happened to her? She continued walking and sparsely replied, Was stabbed in the ribcage during an attack by a small group of Rainbug's bandits. Was she not wearing armor? Dew followed behind her as she went upstairs while asking more questions. And was it a surprise attack? And why was she even outside? Didn't she just give birth to a child? The last one had her spin around to him in an instant. Her fingers covered in metal closed around his neck and pressed him to the wall. What do you know of that child? Sue spat into his face. Dew choked. She's the mother of the princess. In his head he heard the sobbing from last night. A young corn snake hybrid, now only a shadow from the past. A young dragon hybrid with his lips sealed shut after years. There were goosebumps on his skin as an horrific scene manifested itself in his head. And I need to know her story because Avery won't talk to me, and your sister is dead.